Welcome back. I'm Iris Tao. President Trump is reportedly planning to name his new White House ballroom after himself. Is it a fair move? Joining us now live to discuss is Steve Scully, senior fellow at the Former Members of Congress Association, Mally Smith, Democratic strategist, as well as Amanda Makki, lawyer and Republican strategist. Great to have you all on today to discuss these topics. So first, the East Wing has now been mostly torn down already to make way for the new $300 million privately funded ballroom. So Steve, first to you, for how much President Trump has put into the project himself, do you consider it a fair move to potentially name it after himself as well?
Well, first of all, it's completely gone. I mean, it's not partially torn down. The colonnade, the Jackie Kennedy Rose Garden, the entire East Wing, which was built back in 1902, expanded in 1942 by President Roosevelt. So it is completely gone. Is it appropriate? I mean, I guess it's not a surprise. He is the one putting up the money. Certainly under this administration, it will be known as the Trump Ballroom. The question is, in a future administration, if a Democrat is elected, do they keep that name? If you think about it, there's only the Lincoln Bedroom and the Truman Library. Otherwise, it's the State Dining Room, the East Room. And the other issue in all of this is the size of this ballroom, 90,000 square feet. It's going to dwarf the size of the Executive Mansion, something that even George Washington never wanted something so ostentatious. So a lot of debate, a lot of churn, certainly a lot of concerns about what has been lost with the demolition of the East Wing, but not a surprise that he would want to name the ballroom after him, at least for the next 3 years.
So, Mally, President Trump's team has also laid out a timeline showing how past presidents have also made significant changes to the White House. Do you think there is a difference here?
I don't really care that he is renovating the White House. There's been renovations to the White House all the time. What I'm more concerned about is having a president who is focusing his priorities on building a ballroom and not making life better for the American people. Under President Trump's leadership, we have seen inflation rise to 3%. We have seen job growth so bad that he fired the BLS commissioner, and farmers are going bankrupt because of his trade war with China. But if he is choosing to focus his time on a ballroom so he can have bigger parties, I guess that's where his priorities lie. At least the ballroom is cemented to the ground so he can't take it home with him like his Qatari jet.
Well, to your point here, we have seen actually in the past few days a quote by White House Press Secretary Karen Leavitt being taken out of context, actually, her responding to a reporter's question at a press conference saying that, well, among potential other projects, the ballroom is his priority, but apparently not among all things that the president is dealing with. Amanda, what's your response to some Democratic criticism on this project that's ongoing? And also, we have heard, for example, the daughter of former President Bill Clinton, Chelsea Clinton, saying that, oh, this is the people's house, it's not his house, not President Trump's house. So what do you respond to that?
I respond that her father was the one who was running rooms in the White House. And so if that isn't a disgrace, I don't know what is. President Trump is putting up his own money, and he said he would do whatever is necessary to make sure that this is completed. He is also using money from YouTube, for example, in a settlement that they reached of $22 million. And other companies that have been mentioned, tech companies, but also families, people who are interested in seeing the beautification of the White House. So, over the course of the last 100 years, we've seen various renovations to the White House, and none has really seemed to be as controversial as what President Trump's doing, yet he's the one that he is putting up his own money to make sure that it's done and done properly. And at the end of the day, to Mally's point, he's not taking it with him. This is something that he contributes back to the people of the United States and to the next president. So it is a wonderful thing to be able to have more people enjoy the White House, which in essence is what a larger room would do.
So
Iris, if I could just jump in, I think the bigger issue in all of this is the fact that the East Wing was taken down without any public notice. And yes, the ballroom, I'm sure, is going to be beautiful. And yes, past presidents have wanted more space. So taking that into account, I think that the mistake this week was not being totally transparent by saying this is what we're going to do and this is why we're going to do it. to the extreme trying to block photographs of this as if it wasn't going to happen. So that was the one mistake I think that this White House made this week on it.
Well, to be fair on that
Well, the
point, our
Planning
photographers were able to
Commission.
get the pictures because they did open up the park after just a day. So pictures were surely able to be taken by people around the White House here. Did you have a point to say as well?
Well, the Planning Commission said that they didn't actually need to be part of the demolition, just part of the building of it. So that was not something that was required because your question was posed to Ms. Levitt. So I think all in all, people just want to find something to say about President Trump. And certainly the press pool is highly encouraged to go after President Trump and to say, oh, look, we're in a government shutdown and look what he's doing. But the reality is that life has to go on. Just because the Democrats want to stop the government from reopening doesn't mean the president can't go on and do other things during that time.
And speaking of the shutdown here, that leads to our next topic. Health insurance premiums on healthcare.gov are expected to rise about 30% next year, according to final rates approved by Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So, Steve, some say that Obamacare has become a subsidy for insurance companies. Of course, we know there's a lot of debate on Obamacare recently. Is there truth to that statement?
There is, in large part. And look, the insurance companies are sort of blamed for all of this. And I think the Democrats are to blame for not really trying to figure out a long-term solution to the Affordable Care Act. They're the ones that put this deadline in place. The political reality, though, is that those premiums now will go into effect November 1st. So notices are going out. And I think that is their strategy, is to try to make sure that they can make people feel the pain to force the Republicans to the negotiating table. Keep in mind that the House has been in recess since September the 19th, so they're not here. The Senate will be back next week. My hope is that the president would sit down all sides and try to figure out a compromise, because now that we're dealing with air traffic controllers not showing up for the job, the healthcare subsidies, the SNAP program, all of this collectively is creating a lot of pain for millions of Americans, plus the fact that workers, federal workers, they're not getting paid.
So, Mally, at the core of this debate around healthcare subsidies here, do you think Americans have become reliant on these subsidies, potentially due to, some say, the unfortunate changes from insurance companies?
I think with costs rising, yes, these subsidies are critical for many Americans to afford health insurance. But let's talk about the the success of Obamacare. When Obamacare was passed, the uninsurance rate in our country was 15%. That has been cut in half to 7%. When Obamacare was passed, national health spending was growing at a rate of 7% a year, and that has been cut to 4%. So Obamacare has been an unquestionable success in both expanding access to coverage and lowering overall healthcare spending for our country. But the question ahead of us is, what do we do to continue to bring down healthcare costs? And what we need to do is extend the ACA tax credits, or premiums will double for 22 million Americans if they subside. So we need to create a deal that reopens the government and extends these credits permanently.
So, Amanda, how do you see Congress potentially helping to bring premiums back down to their original levels? Any solutions you see on the table? Of course, and we have heard the administration as well as the Republicans saying that, well, we're fine with discussing these details later on, but you got to open the government first. What do you say about that argument?
Yes, the government needs to be opened first, and the Republicans have made that very clear. But two, you're really speaking to the unaffordability of the Obamacare Act, something that Republicans discussed in 2009 and 2010. And that's why you basically saw a partisan bill pass in a reconciliation package, which, for those of you who are not versed in DC talk, that just means they need a majority, 51. And so that's how they passed that bill. So the reality is that Obamacare is unaffordable. Now, I will agree with Mally that it is something that many welcomed, especially when we were in the era back then of Patients' Bill of Rights. Senator Edwards of North Carolina was someone who really touted that, because insurance companies were denying patients access to care. Breast cancer patients weren't getting care. But here's the reality, is that the Democrats did this during COVID. They lifted the income restrictions. And so you've made this wholly unaffordable. And if the Democrats thought it was such a great idea, Why didn't they do anything about this when they controlled the White House, the House, and the Senate? They didn't because it's an unaffordable proposition, and therein lies the problem. So
Real quick
Republicans
note.
understandably know when you give government treats, you can't take them back. It's a very difficult thing to do. We all acknowledge that, regardless of party affiliation. But the reality is that these premium notices are going to go out November 1st. It's going to light up the Capitol phone lines. So Capitol Hill has not seen anything yet until these phone lines light up when they get those premium increases. But also 40 million Americans on the SNAP program are not going to have access to literally putting food on the table. So this is a whole mess. And of course, both sides are blaming each other. But if you're neutral, you would just say you're passing a clean CR. What's the problem? And Democrats don't want to give President Trump a victory because they saw what happened to Senator Schumer when he did that in March. So they're going to play politics with Americans' lives.
Real quick note on affordability. The extending the ACA tax credits permanently would be 10 times cheaper than the billionaire first tax cut that the Trump administration passed. Also, the $40 billion bailout he gave to Argentina would fund the ACA tax credits fully for 2 years. So clearly, the Trump administration is fine for finding money to spend on billionaire tax cuts and bailing out other countries. But when it comes to actually helping Americans afford healthcare, that's where they draw the line, and that's where they get budget conscious.
Well, as we
And
are, of
that's
course,
where the optics are painful, because when you see that and you see the president filing a complaint trying to get $230 million from the Justice Department, the optics for that only play into the Democrats. And you're right, they're trying to play politics in all of this. The Democrats know that that's their only strategy. The big issue, though, will all sides figure out a plan to get this? Because as we all know, Congress only acts when there is a crisis. And my fear is we're heading towards a crisis.
well, certainly a lot to look out for, especially as we all mentioned here, optics as well as policy debates could play into the upcoming midterm elections. So let's see how that goes from here. Meanwhile, one last topic I want to touch on before we let you go here. The Pentagon announced today that it has deployed an aircraft carrier, actually one of the largest in the world, to Latin America to target drug trafficking and cartels. So first, Steve, earlier, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth said that the military carried out yet another strike on a suspected drug boat, killing 6 people. Some people say that administration isn't being transparent. Well, of course, we have heard officials saying that these are terrorists, they're trying to harm Americans, and they will be dead. What do you say to that?
Well, that's 43 people who have been killed and 9 or 10 strikes. We have to take the Pentagon for its word. We don't know. I mean, look, nobody wants to see drugs in this country, so you want to do whatever you can to try to fight this. But a lot of the fentanyl is not coming from Venezuela. That is a fact. And it's also a fact that President Trump wants to see regime change inside Venezuela with President Maduro. And now we have the USS Gerald R. Ford heightening the tensions in the region. Clearly, if there is any further military incursion, my hope is the president does what he should do, which is to get permission from Congress. Drugs are a crisis in this country, but you can't just willy-nilly shoot down these boats without evidence or proof. Again, we don't know. We're taking their word. We don't want drugs in this country, but we've not seen this kind of action by a president in recent years. So it is concerning. Tensions are rising. The military is going to be in the area, and it's something that I think Washington is going to be on edge the next 48 hours.
Mally, your thoughts?
Well, I think with President Trump's continued reckless interventions abroad, he's soon going to be called Donald J. Bush. We need to have an effort to stop drugs from coming into our country. But this saber rattling and military strikes against, drug boats is not the way to go about it. It's inflaming tensions with countries across the world. And I also don't think it's an appropriate long-term solution. Both legally, I think there's serious issues with us just having extrajudicial killings without having a formal declaration of war and without the military providing evidence that these folks are who they say they are. And then second, I think a long-term solution should be a diplomatic one where we focus on this with a law enforcement approach and strengthening our borders so drugs can't get through.
Regime change doesn't work, and mission creep is always, always dangerous for America.
Amanda, what do you think? So the administration says this action, including the strikes, as well as now deploying more forces over, is having a deterrent effect, of course, of preventing more people from potentially trying to harm the U.S. by sending in fentanyl and other drugs, etc. What do you see of this move? Is it an effective, at least short-term approach, or do you think the administration should go for something more long-term and, like Mally was saying, potentially creating less tensions around the region?
Well, you can look at this a variety of ways, and certainly from the lens of Republicans, there are different ways of looking at this. Um, but I think the saying goes, it's always better to be feared than it is to be loved. So, of course, you're creating fear, you're instilling fear in that part of the world. And so people are going to be more cautious. That's the optimism, that's the hope in that. There is a drug crisis in this country. President Trump won in a resounding vote this year, historical, and won all 7 swing states. So you have to look at what he campaigned on. One of them was to make sure that narco-trafficking is not happening, that he would secure the border. These are the types of things that Americans voted for. And if you look at where he gets the highest marks, that's where they are. And so President Trump believes he's doing what he had a mandate to do, and that is to keep the American people safe and to keep drugs, especially fentanyl, out of this country. Now, I will bring in the perspective of some of the hardliners that are saying, why are we doing this and why are we engaging in war? And some are even blaming Marco Rubio for being a neocon and wanting to push Trump to war. And one thing I will say about President Trump, in that many Republicans voted for President Trump because he was the Republican president who wasn't pushing war. He was a war dove, if you will. And so it is a little bit of a difficult thing for Republicans to see it happening, because so many backed President Trump for being someone who did not want to engage in war. And this certainly seems like we're on the precipice of that. But President Trump may not go forward with this, but may just be doing it to instill fear, which I think he's done in other examples too, in other instances too. So maybe that's just what he thinks is best, because I don't believe he wants to send troops in, even if the Secretary of State does.
Well, instilling fear. Let's see how this strategy will continue to play out in the coming days and weeks, as of course we have seen more and more strikes happening the past few weeks. Steve Scully, Mally Smith, Amanda Makki, thank you all for coming on tonight. We appreciate your perspectives.